LiberalViewer presents.
So welcome to the July 16th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 15 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis for you all tonight. Oh, and for those who ask me to use my law degree more during these programs, I will be committing legal analysis at various points during the show, especially during the last 8 of the 15 clips, which is Trump's lying lawyer, Jay Sekulow. I almost titled this video Trump's lying lawyer instead of Trump Jr. caught, but it was a close call. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section as to what would be a better title, but I'll start off. There's no political comedy, no Real Time with Bill Maher, no Saturday Night Live. The Real Time will be back in a couple weeks, but I am trying to start off with like the attempted political comedy or the unintentional political comedy you can get from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. So I'll have some attempted political comedy from Jake Tapper on CNN and unintentional Fox News bias political comedy, of course. Also, as usual, my clips come, actually, they all come this morning tonight from this morning's Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. That's what I will be criticizing for my media criticism. You can see the topic I'm discussing described in detail down in the video description. And I've also put a link down there to the clip list I use of my 15 clips. You can try to read my notes and try to understand what the clips are about. You should at least be able to tell who's in the clips, what network they're from, and what the topic is. Although, of course, there's one big topic, which is Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting from June 2016, the smoking gun, the caught red-handed moment, the Watergate moment. I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But like I said, I'm going to start with a couple somewhat comedic clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. The first one is Jake Tapper talking about Donald Trump tweeting this morning. But for someone who sometimes talks about being a Jewish anchor on CNN, he seems to be criticizing Donald Trump's Christianity. I don't know. Is this a joke? You can let me know what you think in this 23-second clip from the beginning of CNN's State of the Union this morning, or near the beginning. Or no, this is the beginning over here.
President Trump is up this morning observing the Sabbath as only he can, tweeting attacks on the free press and on Hillary Clinton, as well as mounting a defense of his son, Don Jr., who has acknowledged a meeting with Russians who claimed to want to deliver the Trump campaign dirt on Clinton. Asked about the meeting in this poll, 63% of Americans say it was inappropriate. Joining me now.
And there's the Jay Sekulow interview starting with Jake Tapper, and I will have a clip from each of the 5 corporate news outlets, at least one clip from each of the 5, more than one from some, of the Jay Sekulow interview at the end. I told you I have 8 clips of that. But what was that with Jake Tapper at the beginning, saying that Trump's Sabbath consists of tweeting attacks on the media and on Hillary Clinton, and I don't know. I don't know what to make of that Sabbath comment. Was that supposed to be a joke? You can let me know if you think that was Jake Tapper's attempt at political comedy. And before I get to the actual news stories that detail what has happened with Donald Trump Jr. over the last week that I kind of described down in the video description of the topic, I want to show one inadvertent political comedy moment of Fox News bias, where they give you one of those false choices. And actually later I'll show Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday, doing a not terrible job of asking confrontational questions of Jay Sekulow, like he did the last time Jay Sekulow was on Fox News Sunday, where it seemed almost like they were going to come to blows. Well, not really. They were. I don't even think they were in the same room, but it's all over satellite. But one definite piece of bias, and I'll show another piece of Fox News bias in a minute, but this is after the Jay Sekulow interview. They'll talk about how they jousted, and then Chris Wallace will give this false choice that his panel is going to discuss. Is this latest revelation about Donald Trump Jr. fake news, or is it the first hard evidence of a real scandal? Well, it seems like they're is at least a third choice. And actually, if you click over here in the corner, there's a little eye for the poll that I put up this week that gives the obvious third choice, that this is actually just the latest shoe to drop in an ongoing scandal. But here's Chris Wallace in some inadvertent political comedy setting up the false dichotomy at the end of his Sekulow interview, where they talk about their jousting here.
Last time, and you know, we're going to still keep trying to get this.
Look, I don't mind a good joust. A good joust is all right, even early in the morning.
Jay, thank you. Thanks for your time this Sunday.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss whether the Don Jr. meeting is more fake news or the first hard evidence. This is a real scandal.
Fake news or first hard evidence, this is a real scandal. I don't think those are the only choices. Like I said, if you want to answer my weekly poll here, you can click over there and tell me if you think that there is at least that third choice, or you can choose one of the two choices that Fox News gave you on Fox News Sunday this morning. But now I want to get to the actual news stories. I'm going to compare several news stories, including the really brief summary from Fox News I'll get to in a few minutes, that I also think was kind of biased by not bringing up all the changing stories from Donald Trump Jr. this last week. You may remember last Sunday I showed two of those different stories. First, the one where he didn't even mention that there was going to be any kind of damaging information on Hillary Clinton in this meeting he had back in June 2016. That in this next Meet the Press news summary, they're going to call that story number 2. Story number 1 is just, we never heard of the Russians. We never met with the Russians. That was the Trump campaign and Trump administration story number 1, which fell apart pretty quickly. But you'll see in this next NBC clip, they talk about story number 2 and story number 3. Those were the two stories I featured last Sunday on my show because they changed from when I recorded the Sunday morning shows and then breaking news in the afternoon. And of course, the story changed several times after that. And I will discuss how damaging I think this story is to the Trump administration and to Donald Trump Jr. after I show this. I think this was the best summary. It's almost 4 minutes long, but it's worth watching and commenting on, and I'll be reading your live comments from, I think I'm almost up to 100 live viewers, so let me know what you think of Chuck Todd's analysis, and I'll let you know what I think after we watch together here.
Watergate, the seminal moment may have been when White House counsel John Dean said he'd told President Nixon there was a cancer on the presidency. This appears to be the week that the Russia story has metastasized. The gap between the original story Donald Trump Jr. told and what we have learned to be the truth grows by the day, and with each new piece of evidence, the White House is forced to revise and extend its remarks. In 1 week, we moved from the White House and Trump Jr. denying ever having met with Russians through a series of concessions and evolving explanations offered only after reporters had uncovered new facts, to where we are now. That Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, a Russian lawyer, a lobbyist suspected of having ties to Russian intelligence, an interpreter, and maybe others, met at Trump Tower during the campaign to discuss dirt on Hillary Clinton. Is there more? Was it collusion? Aiding and abetting? Treason, as some Democrats charge? Simple opposition research, as President Trump has claimed? Was it even illegal? To be sure, there are many unanswered questions, but here's what we know right now. The Trump team was open to getting information from Russians and willing to cover it up.
As far as my son is concerned, my son is a wonderful young man.
Over the course of 7 days, a head-snapping series of statements. Story number 1, there were no contacts with Russians and the Putin regime during the campaign.
It's absurd, and there's no basis to it.
I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
But last Saturday, the New York Times reports there was a meeting on June 9th, 2016. Story number 2. A meeting did occur with a Russian person. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort all attended.
It was a very short meeting. It was a meeting apparently about Russian adoption. And after about 20 minutes, the meeting ended, and that was the end of it.
Later that Sunday, the New York Times reports that Donald Trump Jr. took the meeting after being promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton. Story number 3.
The comments this one were making about any type of information on Hillary Clinton were vague. They were meaningless. Others exited the meeting very quickly.
Then on Tuesday, with the New York Times ready to publish the email exchange, Donald Trump Jr. tweets it himself, including a June 3rd email offering, quote, information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. The meeting's broker, publicist Rob Goldstone, adding, "This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump." Trump Jr. responds, "If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer." Tuesday night, story number 4.
For me, this was opposition research. They had something, maybe concrete evidence to all the stories I'd been hearing about, but they were probably underreported for, years, not just during the campaign. So I think I wanted to hear it out, but really, it went nowhere.
And in Paris, President Trump tries to justify the idea of campaign meetings with Russians, contact he has denied for months.
I think from a practical standpoint, most people would have taken that meeting. It's called opposition research.
Donald Trump Jr. promises the whole story is now out.
I'm more than happy to be transparent about it, and I'm more than happy to cooperate with everyone.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident is concerned, this is all of it?
This is everything. This is everything.
But it isn't everything, not even in regard to this single meeting. Over the next 3 days, the number of participants in this meeting multiplies. NBC learns that in addition to the Kremlin-connected lawyer, a former counterintelligence officer turned lobbyist, Rinat Akhmetshin, was also there. And there was a translator present. And some Republicans on Capitol Hill are losing patience.
It's serious, and this is a serious situation and one that is a long way from over.
Joining me now is
Oh, sorry, I was just reading your comments along the way, but I actually, like I said, I thought that was the most comprehensive of all the different news stories on the Sunday morning news analysis show this morning. And you saw that they highlighted this email that came out on Tuesday, and, I mean, you couldn't write an email that would be more of a smoking gun. It's kind of like the Nixon tapes in a way. That would be wrong, or, that was like the big quote in the Nixon tapes, not so much what I thought Chuck Todd was talking about, the cancer on the presidency. It was Nixon actually personally authorizing and ordering the cover-up, and this is like an email saying, we are offering you information from the Russian government, and it is bad information about Hillary Clinton, and we'd like to meet with you. And Donald Trump Jr. says, if this is true, I love it. I mean, how could you write it any more clear? Now, I will give my legal analysis later as to whether this is a crime, and you may notice down in the video description, I have put one more of the U.S. codes than I normally have. For the last several weeks, I've been showing you the obstruction of justice code. Now I have 52 U.S. Code Section 30,121 about contributions and donations by foreign nationals. You can read that code yourself by clicking on that link down in the video description. I'll get to that a little more later, but I thought that NBC did a good job covering that there. I thought NBC went a little overboard when they tried to connect it all up to the Russian hacking of the DNC and the later events. They did this whole timeline from June and July 2016 where they connect up all these events that may or may not be connected. I used to be a criminal defense attorney, and this is like a prosecutor's timeline, and this is the kind of thing that I would love to tear apart and show that so far there's no evidence connecting several events that NBC decided to connect up in their data download. By the way, you may remember data download used to have this like Nintendo, battle music that we would argue, people would argue in the comments about whether it was actually Nintendo, the battle music. I can't remember the name of that. What was the battle game that it might have come from? But anyway, they've changed their music. You'll notice in the data download here, where they try to lay out this sort of prosecutor's timeline, which I think may be a little bit much, as I will discuss with you after we watch that together here.
And we are back. A little twist on Data Download this week. We've been talking a lot this morning about the timeline of this past week. But we'd like to look at the timeline of both June and July of 2016, now that we know about this meeting that took place at Trump Tower. So let's break it all down by date. Let's start with June 3rd. That's the first email that is sent to Donald Trump Jr. by publicist Rob Goldstone. In that email, Goldstone promises the younger Mr. Trump dirt on Hillary Clinton, and he explains that the information is, quote, part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump, unquote. June 7th, the general election officially begins when both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump officially clinched their party's nominations on that last primary day. Also on June 7th, remember, the meeting with the Russian lawyer is already on the books for 2 days later. The president says this in his victory speech.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
June 9th, the meeting happens at Trump Tower. June 14th, 5 days later. No speech from the president, by the way, but we do get the first reports that Russian hackers penetrated the Democratic National Committee. It's the first time it's in public that we know about this. June 15th, very next day, it's Russia-linked hacker Guccifer 2.0 who claims credit for the DNC hack. Now, let's fast forward a few weeks to the start of the conventions, Republican and Democratic national conventions. July 18th, that's the first day of the Republican convention. And that's when we get the first reports that the Trump campaign essentially wants to water down or even gut a Republican Party platform statement that was anti-Russia when it comes to the issue of Ukraine. July 22nd, the day after the Republican convention ends, WikiLeaks publishes its first dump of stolen DNC emails. July 27th, 5 days later, in what became his final press conference as a presidential candidate, then nominee Donald Trump says this about Hillary Clinton's emails.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
That's 56 days between that press conference and that first email that we now know about from Goldstone. And then from there, of course, Russian interference seemed to continue through Election Day, the Podesta emails, and there you go. The timeline now, so important, not just to organize yourself, but the timeline now may be evidence. When we come back, how do people...
Well, I mean, the timeline's not really evidence. What you do is you need evidence to connect up all those things on the timeline. That's maybe like a prosecutor's opening statement, or maybe even in their closing statement, they start with the timeline and then they fill in all the things from the testimony that supposedly support the connections in the timeline. But we don't have all those things in the testimony yet. There's really nothing to connect up the June meeting. I mean, coincidence? It shows intent, the possibility that the Trump campaign, they definitely showed willingness to accept help from Russia against, with damaging information from Hillary Clinton. And as Adam Schiff will point out in a minute in a clip I'm going to show, Donald Trump Jr. not only said that he would love it, but he mentioned the best time. He gave them some timing advice. He said, late summer would be great. But instead of Adam Schiff, who is the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, then the next clip I want to show is from Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I think he does a better job of showing the real context of of the June 2016 meeting that Donald Trump Jr. held in Trump Tower with these Russians. And the real context isn't hooking it up to the Russian hacking and all those other things that Chuck Todd tried to show on NBC's Meet the Press there. This is also on NBC's Meet the Press, but what it does is it predates all these statements where Trump officials were saying, Russia? What? Russia? There's no connection with Russia. And that includes people who were like on this email chain, and it shows they were just big liars. That, I think, there's enough evidence to show that. Maybe not hooking up all those things that Chuck Todd was talking about, but here's Mark Warner making a much more tighter connection in terms of context, I think, which I will discuss with you after you watch it here.
Into when we knew about this meeting, but I would say this meeting is very significant in terms of all that's happened. A year ago, senior members of the Trump campaign knew that there was a Russian government effort to try to intervene to help Mr. Trump hurt Hillary Clinton. And so all these denials from the president himself, to Donald Trump Jr., to Paul Manafort, all these denials were clearly false because they knew about this effort and they just failed to reveal it. And that's very, very significant. This is the first time the public has now seen in black and white, there's no effort to disguise that there was a Russian government effort. And not only were the Trump senior campaign officials, you know, having this meeting, but they were anxious to have it and anxious to get this information.
No, I understand you said you did.
And I think Senator Mark Warner is right. Like I said, when I introduced the clip, that he has put the June 2016 meeting in the proper context, in that it predates all these other obvious dishonest statements from Trump administration officials. I mean, there are so many things that there have been just like obvious lies from the Trump administration and from people like Paul Manafort and Donald Trump himself, saying, well, I'm going to show some clips later that have some of these statements in them. But first, I showed the NBC News coverage, first that 4-minute news story, and then the 3-minute prosecutor's timeline. I'm going to show a much shorter story. It's actually less than a minute, from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, with guest host Jonathan Karl this week. And he really, I think he hit the same issues you saw in the NBC clip, but he did it just touching on the last change of story, and there's a lot less information in it, which I think is to ABC's detriment, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip here.
A grim snapshot of public opinion in our new ABC News Washington Post poll. The president's job approval rating at just 36%, the lowest 6-month approval rating for any president in 70 years. The majority of the country says the president is not making significant progress towards his goals. And as for that mystery meeting on the 25th floor of Trump Tower last summer, 63% say it was inappropriate. And now the list of who took part in that meeting grows. Don Jr. insists nothing came of it. Here's what he told Fox News.
I'm more than happy to be transparent about it, and I'm more than happy to cooperate with everyone.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident's concerned, this is all of it?
This is everything. This is everything.
So we take those questions about what happened inside.
So Jonathan Karl did point out that Donald Trump Jr. said something and it turned out not to be true, because there were all these, these additional people in the meeting after he said there was nothing more to come out. But they didn't go through like the story 1, story 2, story 3, story 4 that you saw on NBC's Meet the Press, which is definitely a more thorough look at. But I thought that at least when they brought on the Democrat from the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, that he did a better job than any of the other people who were on any of the shows as to what the possible theory of the crime was. Not so much on the election law, which I will give my own legal analysis on later, but what the possible quid pro quo would be in terms of conspiring with a foreign power to defraud the United States, basically, and to commit election fraud, or various. It's not the election law that I put down in the video description, but anyway, here is Adam Schiff on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking to Jonathan Karl, where he, I think, has some more conservative, by conservative I mean not jumping to conclusions as to what the connection is between the June 2016 meeting and the other Russian intervention in our election, that it shows intent, but you need more. But the fact that the idea that there isn't more, so far all we can rely on is the word of Donald Trump Jr. and the Trump administration, which is not very reliable, as you can see Adam Schiff explained himself over here.
Look at this Trump Tower meeting, and certainly it's problematic, and the shifting explanations of it are problematic. But the bottom line, is there any evidence whatsoever tying this meeting or that Russian lawyer to the centerpiece of this Russian influence campaign, which was the hack of the DNC, the hack of the Clinton campaign emails? Is there anything whatsoever tying this meeting to that activity by the Russians?
Well, you know, it's certainly tied in the sense that this is about as clear evidence you could find of intent by the campaign to collude with the Russians, to get useful information from the Russians.
A willingness to accept, we see from the president's son, but we don't see anything.
More than that, though, a willingness not only to accept, but to indicate to Russia what the best timing was. Of course, Don Jr. says in the emails, late summer. And what do we know about late summer? That's when the Russians start dumping this information. To accept the attorney's representation that no crime was committed here, you have to accept Don Jr.'s representations if they went into that meeting. And here they want something. They want information from the Russians. The Russians want something. They want repeal of the sanctions law, the Magnitsky law. If there's any kind of an understanding that comes out of that meeting, you get us the dirt, you start leaking dirt on Hillary Clinton, and we will look favorably on repealing the Magnitsky Act. That is a very serious crime.
Okay, you've heard that.
So you see one possible theory of a crime here, which is the quid pro quo, the dirt on Hillary Clinton for repeal of the Magnitsky Act. Of course, President Obama was opposed to the Magnitsky Act. Later you'll hear, I think Jay Sekulow was never corrected on any of the shows when he kept referring to it as the Magnitsky Act for some reason, but it's the Magnitsky Act, and what it does is it put sanctions on certain oligarchs who had violated human rights, so that like the money they're stealing from, you know, the Russian people, they can't use it in the West. You know, they can't use it to buy real estate. They can't use it to send their kids to college. I saw one of the pundits on one of the shows. It was actually on AM Joy this morning. This Russian dissident was on there talking about how this really is one of the biggest thorns in the side of the Putin administration or the Putin government in Russia, because all of these oligarchs who are beholden to him, who he controls, this really hits them because they want to not just steal the money from the Russians, but they want to go to the West and spend it, and the Magnitsky Act is preventing them from doing that. So anyway, that was Adam Schiff explaining that possible theory of the crime. I think there's an easier theory from of the crime about accepting a campaign contribution from a foreign national, which I will get to in a little while. But first I want to show two Fox News Sunday clips. Is it two or three? No, it's three Fox News Sunday clips. The first one is one more Fox News bias clip where I think Chris Wallace really, compared to what you saw from NBC, of course, and then even from ABC, the Fox News really didn't do much news reporting on the changing stories from Donald Trump Jr. and how he kept contradicting himself. They just said, you know, this, that, you know, it's making it, the latest revelations make it tougher for them to put the Russia story behind them, and maybe question the credibility of the Trump administration, which I didn't think was a very strong summary of what's been going on this last week, especially given that other clip I showed you where they're giving you this false choice between fake news or first hard evidence there might be a scandal. And that's kind of in the same vein from Fox News Sunday this morning, just 32 seconds long over here.
Our top story. For months, Donald Trump and his team have tried to put questions about links to Russian interference in the election behind them. But that is now much tougher, with a stream of revelations about a meeting Donald Trump Jr. and other campaign officials held with Russian operatives last summer, expecting to get damaging information about Hillary Clinton. How does this affect the credibility of the Trump White House? And what does it mean for at least 4 investigations into possible collusion? Joining me now is Jay.
And joining him now will be Jay Sekulow. And I have 2 Jay Sekulow clips of where Chris Wallace, I think, is actually very confrontational with Jay Sekulow, that one of Trump's lawyers, and I talked about him when he was on a couple weeks back, where he is also the head of the ACLJ, which is this ACLU doppelganger that tries to fight for the rights of Christians and the rights, to have the United States, against Establishment Clause cases that say the government can't endorse religion. And I've never found him to be very honest. And like I said at the beginning of the program, I almost titled this video Trump's Lying Lawyer. And this is now the first of the next 8 clips, which will all be Trump's lying lawyer, Jay Sekulow. And as I criticized Chris Wallace in his previous 2 clips for not really being hard enough on the Trump administration, I have to say he is pretty tough, and especially tough in this first clip I'm going to show, where he tries to get Jay Sekulow to admit that the changing stories are making it hard to accept the word or the denials of the Trump administration, and that when they call it fake news and a hoax, that what came out this week pretty much put that to rest. And it's a real struggle because Jay Sekulow has these dodges, one about James Comey and one about Ukraine. You'll see he used these over and over again when he did the full Ginsburg and went on all 5 shows. And I'm going to kind of compare how the different anchors dealt, at least not all 5, but how at least a few of them dealt with some of those dodges, starting with, this is almost 5 minutes and 40 seconds long, but it's a valiant attempt to get an answer from Jay Sekulow that he refuses to give, as I will discuss with you after we watch this unusually long clip from this morning here.
The story first broke about possible links between the Trump campaign and Russia. The president and his team have repeatedly dismissed this as a hoax and fake news. Here are a few examples.
It's disgusting. It's so phony. That exactly goes to show you what the DNC and what the Clinton camp will do. They will lie and do anything to win.
I have nothing to do with Russia. And even for anything, what do I have to do with Russia?
Was there any contact in any way between Trump or his associates and the Kremlin or cutouts they had?
Of course not. Why would there be any contacts between the campaign?
The entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians. Zero.
Jay, do you now acknowledge that all of those denials are at the very least suspect?
No, you've got to put them in context of what the president said and exactly what took place here, Chris. I think it's important to put the framework here. How did we end up with a special counsel? Here's how. The former FBI director, was the FBI director at the time, James Comey, had a series of meetings with the President of the United States. In those meetings, he took notes. He put them on his government computer, put them in his government desk, and when he was terminated from position, which he would acknowledge that the President had the authority to do, he gave them to a friend of his to leak to the press. So conversations he had with the President of the United States, he gives to a friend. Hold on a second, Chris.
I'm aware of the history, but this doesn't have anything to do with my question, which is whether or not there were contacts.
It has everything. Yeah.
Can you answer the question?
I'm going to answer your question.
Does this?
I am, and you're going to let me answer it. So I'm going to finish what I was saying.
It depends how long we're going to take to get there.
Not long, Chris. He leaked the information for one purpose and one purpose only to his friend, and he said to get a special counsel, and a special counsel is appointed. So the entire premise upon which this entire investigation has been based was based on illegally leaked information, including conversations with the President of the United States. And today it's announced that James Comey has signed a book deal where he's going to discuss all this. So you tell me, you think that's okay?
I'm not asking you about any of that. I'm asking you about...
Yes, you did. You said, do I think...
Wait a minute, Jay. You said, let you finish. Now let me finish. The question I'm asking you is very simple. The president, his vice president, his son repeatedly denied any contacts with the Russians. Given what we've learned this week about the contact between a number of top campaign officials, including the president's son, are all those denials that it's just fake news and a hoax, are those suspect?
I just answered the question on why the president's statements have been clear on what this was involving in his view, and I gave you just now the analysis on how, in fact, this investigation started. And
which is not a question I asked, but let's go, if we can, to
Chris, let's not go through that again. It was the question you had.
No, it wasn't. The question I asked you, Jay, is whether or not the denials are suspect. I didn't ask you about James Comey.
I do not think the denials are suspect. I do not think the denial by the President of the United States is suspect at all.
Here is the email exchange in June of 2016 between Don Jr., setting up the meeting between Don Jr. and the Russians. Rob Goldstone writes, the Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aras, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump. Don Jr. responds, if that's what you say, if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Doesn't that contradict the denial of any contact between the Trump campaign and the Russians?
No, I mean, what it states was that there was going to be a meeting, but and you said the Russians. This was a lawyer who was Russian. This was a lawyer who ended up was Russian. And what took place at that meeting, and it's been well reported, and you've reported this as well, the discussions involved the Maginski Act and Russian adoptions. It was quickly ended. It was in the middle of a campaign. And look, this idea that it may have involved opposition research, which never materialized evidently, the fact is, you know, the Ukrainians at the very same time were working with the DNC and the Clinton campaign to give what? Opposition research on Donald Trump and his associates. So everybody's acting as if okay, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, doesn't it indicate, you say, well, it was a meeting about adoption. We'll get to that in a moment. But the fact of the matter is, the reason that Don Jr. went into that room and Jared Kushner went into that room and Paul Manafort went into that room was not to talk about adoption. It's because they had been promised, they'd been promised by Rob Goldstone that there would be information as part of the Russian government's effort to tip the election to President Trump.
Yeah, and of course, nothing in that meeting that would have taken place, even if it was about the topic of an opposition research paper from a Russian lawyer, is illegal or a violation of the law. And by the way, I am not the only lawyer, and you know this, Chris. Most lawyers, many, I'd say a vast majority of the lawyers that you've interviewed and others have interviewed on your network and other networks have acknowledged that the meeting itself and those proposed discussions would not have been a violation of the law.
But the point is...
And I'm going to get to the violation of the law clip in just a minute, and that's where Chris Wallace actually brings up this election law that I put down in the video description, 52 USC section 30121 about contributions and donations from foreign nationals. And you notice he talked about whether they were part of the Russian government or not. For the U.S. code, it doesn't even matter whether they're from the Russian government. As long as they're not U.S. citizens or permanent residents, they're not allowed to contribute to our campaigns. But I thought Chris Wallace did a fairly good job of being confrontational there and of trying to get him to answer the question at the beginning, although he did kind of fall prey to the old like Kellyanne Conway trick of bringing up all these red herrings to the until the questioner starts asking about a totally different topic, and he kind of forgot he was asking about those clips at the beginning, which I promised you earlier, where you saw all these Trump administration officials denying there were any meetings or connection with Russia, and then he showed the email. I was, by the way, reading the live comments along the way, and I don't know if I can pronounce this username correctly, but I will show you this comment, which I think the name of the commenter is Iskovini Garga, I think. Yeah, the montage of liars. That's a good name for the Trump administration officials denying any connection with Russia. And Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, to his credit, did it, and his producers and the whole show put together that montage of liars. So we have to give Fox News credit for that. And also, I think Chris Wallace was the one questioner talking to the Trump administration lawyer, or one of Trump's scandal lawyers, Jay Sekulow, to actually bring up this federal elections code that I was talking about, the 52 USC section 30121 about contributions and donations by foreign nationals. And Jay Sekulow's answer is totally bogus for reasons, even though I'm not an election law specialist, I have to say that right up front, but I do have some experience with election law, serving on the board of a 501c4 corporation, which I will talk about after I show Jay Sekulow claiming that getting opposition research from a foreign government is not something of value, and I will explain why I think that it is bogus after we watch that clip together here.
Out were not violations of a statute. And so when you talk about Russian collusion, colluding to do what? Colluding to violate what law?
Well, let's talk about the legality of the meeting. The U.S. Code, and let's put it up, bars a foreign national from giving money or, quote, thing of value in connection with an election, and it bars anyone from soliciting such assistance. Wasn't the Trump campaign, in agreeing to that meeting, not talking about what happened, but what they thought when they went into that meeting, wasn't it soliciting something of value, which was the Kremlin, as they believed it, the Kremlin's effort to tip the election to Donald Trump?
Well, number one, they didn't solicit the meeting, and you know that by reviewing the emails.
But they agreed to it, and they agreed to it, and in fact, Donald Trump said, I love it, and he agreed to the meeting on the 25th floor of Trump Tower.
The opposition research, if it would have materialized, is not a thing of value. There's never been a case that has said that opposition research is a thing of value. And by the way, there's been FEC lawyers, Federal Election Commission lawyers, that have talked about that as well. So I think, Chris, you don't conflate. I don't think it's appropriate to conflate the exact transaction as it was laid out in those emails, which was not a solicitation by the Trump campaign to get information. It was an offer of opposition research. Compare that to what took place with the Ukrainians and the DNC, where they were working in collusion with each other, or when the DNC was leaking to one of the other networks the questions that they were going to ask during the debates. So everyone's acting as if there's this massive collusion statute that only applies here. The fact is there is no collusion statute.
Well,
period.
I mean, there are a couple of points here, and one of them is that you seem to be sliding over the fact that this wasn't CNN that was giving questions to Hillary Clinton. This was, according to the offer that was being made by Rob Goldstone, this was the Kremlin, a hostile power, offering information. Christopher Wray, the president's own FBI director nominee, saw it this way. Take a look.
To the members of this committee, any threat or effort to interfere with our elections from any nation state or any non-state actor is the kind of thing the FBI would want to know.
He's not saying any actual interference. He's saying any offer is something the FBI would want to know. Would you agree that Donald Jr. and Jared and Paul Manafort should have notified the FBI?
Here, list what Chris Wray just said. It would be he would investigate any type of involvement of interference. The President of the United States has said precisely the same thing. He said that on multiple occasions. You could go back and check the record on this. The President said to James Comey, if satellites were doing something, remember that whole statement? But here, what do you have? What took place between what we know took place was not a violation of the law. There's not a violation of the law. The question is Russia's other engagement on a global scale as directed to the United States. That's being investigated. And the president has asked Vladimir Putin himself about that, talked to him about that on multiple occasions when they were just at the G20. So this idea that that what Chris Wray said is somehow inconsistent with what the president said, I think is a false narrative. It's not true. They're not inconsistent statements.
Go
ahead.
You began this interview by...
Not inconsistent statements. I mean, the FBI director nominee, Christopher Wray, who apparently I went to college with, but I have no memory of him whatsoever, says that the Donald Trump Jr., when he got this email offering the help from the Russian government to the Trump campaign by giving them dirt on Hillary Clinton, that they should have notified the FBI. How is that not inconsistent with any statements from the Trump administration? That's hard to believe. But one thing I want to point out about what Jay Sekulow said about election law, he said there's no case finding that opposition research is a thing of value. Well, I haven't done research. Like I said, I'm not an election law specialist, but I do serve on for like 10 years now, I've served on the board of directors of the ACLU of Northern California, which is a 501c4 corporation that, because it's a nonpartisan group, so it doesn't actually support candidates, but it does do issue advocacy, including on California ballot measures. Like over the last 10 years, there have been 2 ballot measures to try to repeal the death penalty in California, and the ACLU of Northern California provided staff to work on those campaigns. They're not candidates, but they're issue campaigns, and so it's within the nonpartisan policy of the ACLU. And when they gave the work of staff to any of these campaigns, they had to report it as what's called an in-kind contribution. I don't know whether opposition research itself has ever been the subject of a case, but in-kind contribution, which means our staff has done work, has done research, including research like in the case of these death penalties ballot initiatives, the ACLU staff did, polling research and public opinion research and all sorts of different kinds of not necessarily opposition research, but research that takes staff time. That, if we're paying staff to do stuff for you, that means we are giving what's called an in-kind contribution to your campaign, and that is something of value. And there's tons of election law on that. So I don't know, is that a lie from Jay Sekulow? Is it just misleading? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But like I said, I'm not an election law expert, but I do have some background in the law, and I've read the statute that you can read yourself down in the video description. And I do know that in-kind contributions of work by people that costs money, that is something of value. So that denial by Jay Sekulow, I don't think so. But anyway, I want to move on to some of the other Jay Sekulow clips. This is actually on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where I thought they were pretty weak on that Ukraine dodge. I didn't think Chris Wallace was particularly strong on it either, although he did some other things that I have already praised. But you'll see that Jonathan Karl also starts off with a question about Christopher Wray, the FBI director nominee from Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump Jr. should have reported this attempt by the Russian government to influence our election to the FBI. And you'll see Jay Sekulow try to answer it on ABC this morning over here.
Law was broken. But do you accept what we heard from the president's pick to run the FBI, that what should have happened there, if a situation where you have representatives of a foreign government offering assistance in an election, that what should have happened is that the FBI should have been notified?
Well, I've wondered why the Secret Service, if this was nefarious, why did the Secret Service allow these people in? The president had Secret Service protection at that point. That raised a question with me. Number two, we can't act like this is in a vacuum. We know for a fact, as were reported extensively in an investigative journalist piece by Politico, that the Ukrainians were in direct contact with DNC officials and traded information back and forth. So I think, to say, I understand what Chris Wray was saying. And Donald Trump Jr. himself said things should have been done differently. Having said that, again, none of that is violation of the law. That's more process.
Okay, I want to look at the big...
And Jonathan Karl not only let Jay Sekulow get away with that Ukraine dodge, and he even asked Adam Schiff about the Ukraine issue later, which, as far as I can tell, I haven't really looked really deeply into the Ukraine issue, because it's so obviously what they call a red herring, a dodge to try to distract from the real issue, because who really cares what the Hillary Clinton campaign did at this point? I mean, I suppose there could be a criminal prosecution if there was really anything there, which I don't think there is from what the superficial look I've given it. But the real reason I wanted to play that clip, I didn't mention before I showed it, is, did you hear Jay Sekulow attack the Secret Service there? He said, well, if Trump people were meeting with all these nefarious criminals, why did the Secret Service even let them into Trump Tower? And actually, there's been a statement since that Jay Sekulow interview from the Secret Service, where they actually said Trump, there was no Secret Service protection in Trump Tower at the time of in June 2016 at the time of this meeting. So that was another bogus lie from Trump's lawyer. Another reason maybe I should have titled this video "Trump's Lying Lawyer" instead of "Trump Jr. Caught?" ? Although whether he's caught or not, I'll talk about it a little more. But before I get to that, I want to show Jake Tapper over on CNN State of the Union talking to Jay Sekulow, and I think he did a much better job of confronting this bizarre Ukraine dodge. You saw Chris Wallace confronting the James Comey dodge. Here's Jake Tapper, CNN State of the Union, trying to get Jay Sekulow to answer a question about, even if it's not illegal, right, even if it's not, he starts off with this quote from Charles Krauthammer, a Fox News commentator, who said even if what Trump did is not illegal, it's still immoral and unethical, which should be a really strong argument for the head of the ACLJ, who's supposedly this big Christian guy who is fighting for Christian values. But he won't have any of it, and instead he tries this Ukraine dodge, and Jake Tapper has the strongest response to it, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together, which runs about, let me see, this is clip number 12, which is about 4 minutes long here.
Conservatives expressed disappointment after reading the emails from Donald Trump Jr. in which he expressed glee at the prospect of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton from what he thought would be the Russian government. This is what Charles Krauthammer, a conservative columnist, had to say. Quote, "The Russia scandal has entered a new phase and there's no going back. This is not hearsay, not fake news, not unsourced leaks. What Donald Jr. and Kushner and Manafort did may not be criminal, but it is not merely stupid. It is also deeply wrong, a fundamental violation of any code of civic honor." Are you willing to acknowledge that regardless of the legality here, this was wrong and a violation of civic honor?
Well, look, I deal with the law, so that's what I'm the lawyer for the president. And campaigns involve opposition research. And the situation with the email exchange that was released by Donald Trump Jr. And what was described there is look at it compared to, for instance, the situation with the Ukrainians, the DNC, and the Clinton campaign.
The moment that there's an FBI investigation or Senate and House Intelligence Committee investigations into Ukraine and the DNC and the Clinton campaign, I'm happy to discuss it. But that's not what's going on right now. And I know
isn't that interesting that there isn't one? But go ahead, Jake.
There isn't one because nobody from the Ukrainian government met with anybody from the Clinton campaign. But moving on from that, you're talking about the legality, and I understand you're a lawyer, but you're also a man of faith. Isn't it kind of important whether or not what Donald Trump Jr. and Manafort and Kushner did, isn't it also important whether or not it's legal, whether or not it's wrong, whether or not it's ethical?
Well, you're conflating, Jake, three perspectives here. The legality, was the meeting and what took place legal or not? We, of course, and as almost every legal expert said, it's not illegal. And then you're trying to put a moral, ethical aspect to it, and it's easy to do that in 20/20 hindsight, but not when you're in the middle of a campaign. And again, I'm not a campaign lawyer. I wasn't a campaign lawyer, but meetings were taking place, as Donald Trump Jr. said, 15, 20 minutes apart. This one went even shorter. So I think everybody that's looking backwards and say would have, should have, could have, and Donald Trump Jr. said he would have done some things differently. But to go back a year later and say this is what should have happened when the meeting itself was 20 minutes and a series of meetings that took place for days and days and months, I don't think that's fair to Donald Trump Jr., to Jared Kushner, or to Manafort for that matter, because no one was in the situation of that kind of campaigning in the middle of a presidential election. There's a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions about opposition research coming on all sides, Republican, Democrat, Independent. That's
not with
the nature of the body politics.
Not with the governments of hostile foreign powers Jay. I mean, that's not normal. You can talk about opposition research all you want, but the Russian government attorney, that's what this is billed at, with high-level intelligence on Hillary Clinton. I mean, for all Don Jr. knew, that was coming from the FSB, the successor to the KGB. That was coming from, human intelligence or signals intelligence. He had no idea where it was coming from. It's not normal Oppo. Normal Oppo is legally obtained.
Well, the Ukrainian, I go back to the Ukrainian example. I know you don't want to discuss it because you say it's not being investigated, which raises a question. But here, in the Ukrainian situation, they actually exchanged documents from a foreign government. So
because Paul Manafort did work in Ukraine, people in Ukraine wanted the United States to know, but that was all from a legal and public
Well, wait a minute. Well,
hearing.
He was running the, but Jake, he was running the campaign at the time. So I mean, we're acting like this is some kind of one-off thing that never happens in campaigns, and you just gave the evidence of exactly what took place there, right?
Nobody from the Ukrainian government met with the Clinton campaign. Again, as I said,
that's not true. There were representatives at the Ukrainian embassy. The political report was clear. Go ahead.
Again, I know you want to change the subject. Let's go back to Russia. Donald Trump Jr. was asked...
And he kind of successfully did change the subject, but like I said, I think Jake Tapper did the best job of confronting Jay Sekulow on the Ukraine help the Democrats dodge, and I think what his criticism of that dodge was what I've gleaned from my, like I said, somewhat superficial look into the Politico article, which basically says that there was some effort by the government of Ukraine to make sure that the Democrats were aware of publicly available information showing that Paul Manafort was lobbying for the pro-Russian forces in the Ukraine. And that seems somewhat different from what Donald Trump Jr. did, which is have meetings with Russian nationals to try to get dirt on Hillary Clinton that was hacked or somehow otherwise held confidentially by the Russian government. But if you think it's the same, you can let me know down in the comment section. By the way, I was really grateful, and during that last clip I noticed I've gotten 2 super chat contributions, a $20 contribution from Jen Hope and a $100 contribution from, is it Rufino's Muse? Here's the screen capture of that I get to see. So not asking me any questions, just thanking me, and I appreciate the money support that I think means that maybe officially have made more in at least gross super chat contributions. I think YouTube takes like 30% of my super chat contributions, but more in gross super chat contributions than in ad revenue in the last month, which is why I'm in this sad state of affairs, having to beg for contributions from people, especially in the last few months, and certainly more in Patreon contributions. If you want to become a patron, you can also support me monthly. I have about 80 patrons right now, and that also gives me significantly more revenue right now than the ad revenue that YouTube is letting me have. So sorry to break in here and thank my patrons and thank my super chat contributors, but that really helps me keep going, as well as your positive supportive comments. That's really nice, so thanks for that. And the next clip I want to show, or the next 2 clips, are from the Jay Sekulow interview on NBC's Meet the Press, and I praised Jake Tapper in that last clip, really going after Jay Sekulow about his Ukraine dodge. Here you notice, and I watched this clip several times, Jay Sekulow doesn't really lie, but he does this lawyerly misleading thing where he takes this question from Chuck Todd about whether Donald Trump was involved in this first very dishonest statement from Donald Trump Jr. that was the first story I showed last week on my Sunday show, and it was like one of several stories. It didn't even mention any damaging information on Hillary Clinton in the June 2016 meeting. It just said there was a meeting with this Russian lawyer about adoption and nothing came of it, and apparently Donald Trump himself was involved in somehow approving this statement when he was flying back from Europe. And so that's what Chuck Todd asked Jay Sekulow about. And he says, was he involved in making the statement? And you'll notice, because I noticed watching this several times, Jay Sekulow starts off mirroring the question by saying, was not involved. He says, was not, and then he stops himself and goes to his talking point, did not draft. Of course, he didn't ask, did he draft the statement? He said, did he approve the statement? And which means Donald Trump is involved in the cover-up if he approved the statement or was involved in the approval process, even if he didn't draft it himself. And Chuck Todd even picks up on that, and I think you get caught in this, that Jay Sekulow gets caught in lawyerly misleading over in this clip.
Can you tell me about the reports that the president was involved in the initial response that Donald Trump Jr. gave the New York Times?
So I read those reports as well, and the president did not draft the response. The response came from Donald Trump Jr., and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyer. So that is where that statement, again, I think it's important to understand what this was. When the information, as the information was to be released a few days later, but as the information became public, my understanding is that Donald Trump Jr. and his lawyer worked on a statement to make regarding the scope of the meeting, and the scope of the meeting, that what was discussed at the meeting actually ended up being more about the Maginski Act than anything else, which, by the way, is not unusual because days after, I mean, literally the next day or two, the same lawyer that has the Russia affiliation was down in Washington pitching the Maginski Act repeal. So now, that's really what this was about.
You were very careful to say the president didn't draft the statement. That isn't what I asked. Did the president get a heads up on the statement? Did he sign off on the statement? Was he asked to read the statement before it was given to the New York Times on Air Force One?
No, I mean, I can't say whether the president was told a statement was going to be coming from his son on that. I don't have that. I didn't have that conversation. And let me say this. The president, but I do want to be clear, the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement. It came from Donald Trump Jr. So that's what I can tell you, because that's what we know. And again, Donald Trump Jr. has said the same thing, that it was in fact from him, and I believe it was his lawyer was in consultation. I'm sure his lawyer was in consultation.
So you keep saying...
So you can see, I think, Jay Sekulow got caught there. And by the way, I think I overestimated one of my super chat contributions there. As some people pointed out, it was 100 Mexican pesos, but that's still a nice supportive gesture from my fans, so I appreciate that. And I have two more quick clips. I want to show first Chuck Todd here talking about whether the meeting needs more investigation and getting this dodge about James Comey, and you can see how Chuck handles that over in this clip.
Again, has referred to this Russia story as a hoax. How do you refer to something as a hoax when you have an email like this with Donald Trump Jr. saying, I love it, when he finds out there's information coming from the Russians? At this point, can't reasonable people conclude that this meeting is enough to begin an investigation?
Well, here's the problem with this, and I've said this before, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to be very clear on this with you. How did this all start? And that's important here. James Comey had a meeting with the President of the United States where he took information about this private meeting with the President, put it on his government computer, went to his government office, and decides after he gets fired to leak a conversation he had with the President of the United States to a friend of his, to then leak it to a reporter. For what purpose? For the sole purpose of obtaining a special counsel, which was appointed a few days later. So the basis upon which this entire special counsel investigation is taking place is based on what? Illegally leaked information that was a conversation of the President of the United States with the then FBI director. And that, to me, is problematic from the outset, and I think that raises very serious legal issues as to the scope and nature of what really could take place. And I go back to the other statement, Chuck, and that is, again, the meeting in and of itself, of course, not an illegal act.
Mr. Sekulow, I didn't ask you about James Comey. I asked you about the specific email. No, I asked you about the specific email. Can't reasonable people conclude that because of what was said in that email between Donald Trump Jr. and Mr. Goldstone, the British publicist, in what he claimed this information was coming from the Russian? Can't reasonable people say that's enough to trigger an investigation? I take you at your word that there's no illegal act there yet. But is that not a trigger for an investigation?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Donald Trump Jr. said he would cooperate with anybody. He made that very clear when he was on air talking about it. And again, as the lawyer, Chuck, when you have to understand this, as the lawyer, I look at what would you say, doesn't this trigger an investigation? If there's an investigation, you're looking at what law may have been violated here. And again, the meeting and what took place at the meeting, based on all the information that you just said, is not a violation of any law, statute, or code. So again, I question, I raised that question, by the way, with former Director Comey, because that's the basis upon which all that started, and I think it's important to have the full context. You asked the full question, I gave you a full answer.
I understand that, but why does?
Okay. So I think Chuck Todd tried valiantly there to deal with the Comey dodge probably better than anyone, but he I don't think did that great a job dealing with the no illegality question. But I want to show one more clip. This is from CBS's Face the Nation, John Dickerson. This is the fifth and final of the full Ginsburg that Jay Sekulow did. I think John Dickerson, he did not deal well with the Ukraine dodge. He kind of let it just pass. But he actually was the only one to bring up the fact that Jay Sekulow had written this book calling Russia the unholy alliance, with Vladimir Putin on the cover, and trying to pin him down on that, and still not getting very far in the final clip for tonight here.
Would have been, but again, the conversation was on the Maginski Act.
Let me ask you, as somebody who knows something about national security, you've written about it. Back in June of 2016, leaving aside, there was no question of collusion at that time in the public record, but meeting with somebody who was offered and advertised as an agent of the Russian government, wouldn't that have been something that if you were advising the campaign, you would say, Russia is an enemy of the United States, don't take this meeting?
Well, look, I wasn't their lawyer then. I didn't represent the campaign, and I don't like to look at hindsight on how you do it. Donald Trump Jr. himself said he would do the meeting if he had to do it all over again. There are things he would do differently. So that's how you look at it. I mean, opposition research in campaigns happens all the time. You had the situation with the Ukrainians doing the same thing with the Democratic National Committee in the Clinton campaign. So, again, I don't look at any of this in a vacuum. You look at it at the time, it was in the middle of a campaign. And, again, I'm not their lawyer. I was not the campaign lawyer. I'm not the campaign lawyer. I represent the president. I need to be clear on this. The president's engagement on this was that he was not aware and did not participate in any of this. So I want to be really clear on that. And I appreciate you letting me just say that.
Absolutely. But on this question of what people were thinking about the Russians in the summer of 2016, I mean, you wrote a book called The Unholy Alliance about the Russians. Vladimir Putin is on the cover. And so it's not like this is the same as the Ukrainians. This is the previous nominee of the Republican Party said the Russians were America's #1 geopolitical foe. So shouldn't that have raised red flags just from a national security standpoint?
Well, look, I think Don Jr., addressed that, saying if he was looking at it, he would look at it differently now, or handle it differently. But again, at the heat of the campaign, it's easy to be. I'm the lawyer. He's not a lawyer. I deal with the legal issues. He was helping the campaign. So I understand exactly the question you're asking. Look, the president went to Vladimir Putin at the G20 and talked about this. It's not as if the president's not addressing this, and he's addressed it publicly about his concerns with Russian engagement generally, and he asked Putin about it twice.
Let me ask you, when we last talked, you said...
So I appreciate John Dickerson in that clip bringing up the Unholy Alliance book by Jay Sekulow with Putin on the cover and pressing him on that, but he did kind of come up with some sort of false equivalence between what Ukraine did and what Russia did, what Ukraine did with the Democrats and what Russia did with the Republicans and Trump. And I don't think that really exists. But anyway, that's the final clip. I have to finish up the show. I appreciate the 265 or so of you who showed up as live viewers, my recorded show viewers. I hope you appreciate all the work I put into watching the shows and picking out the clips and giving my media criticism and political analysis and even committing a little legal analysis for you all tonight. And I will be back next week, and whenever I have a chance to put up another video, of course I will. But until then, you can expect my Sunday live clip roundups every Sunday, and until I have a chance to put up another video or another live stream, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.